are in right now is the ABCs of Supporting Student Resilience with Dr. Rosenna Bakari in the adult track. It's from 10:30 to 11:45. My name is Megan Brundage. I am the ECOC host. We also have Chad Schoenwill, our Colorado College host. He's our IT extraordinaire. First, some housekeeping. We would like you to save your questions for the end. You can put your questions in the chat. I'm going to collect them and hold them until the end. Chat is going to go to just to me, Dr. Bakari, and Chad. And then the last 15 minutes will be reserved for discussion. In the last 5 minutes, I'm going to put in an eval in our chat. So please fill that out. It's very valuable to us. Dr. Bakari, are you ready?
Good morning. I am ready. Thank you. I'm excited.
Okay, so ECOC is proud to present Dr. Rosenna Bakari. Dr. Bakari has spent many years teaching in higher education, including the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, Drake University, the State University of New York, and Des Moines Area Community College. She has trained pre-service teachers and pre-service counselors. She's the author of 6 books. The title of a recent Amazon bestseller is The Healing Journey, Relationships and Wellness Guide. She also supports people's healing through her empowerment partnering practice. She's a former resident of Colorado Springs and received the Colorado Springs Business Journal Woman of Influence recognition in 2017. In the poetry world, she's known as Rogue Scholar and recites transformational poetry that opens hearts and minds. All of her scholastic, poetic, and entrepreneurial endeavors are the culmination of her healing experience from trauma, superb education, world travel, and spiritual practice. Without further ado, Dr. Bakari.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I'm pretty excited. It is a Saturday morning, and I would imagine just a few of you might have some other places you prefer to be, but you are here with us. I never take your presence for granted. So I appreciate your time over the next 75 minutes. I intend to keep you engaged. So bear with the technology as that creates maybe a little more awkwardness than if we were in person, but I will certainly do my best to keep us flowing here. So we are ready to begin with a screen share. Most of this will be through a slide presentation, not all, but we feel like that makes for an easier transition. So.
Hey, Dr. Bakari, this is Chad. I think we're probably supposed to be hearing the audio of the YouTube video, but we don't hear it yet. When you do the screen share, there's a little checkbox you have to check that says share computer audio.
Share with what?
Share computer audio. So what I would do is stop sharing and then do the share again and look for that little box. It's way down at the bottom. It says share sound or share computer audio.
I don't see that. And that's okay. It was just a little intro. I'll skip the intro. It's okay. It was just a 30-second intro. So
okay,
we will survive without Whitney. I'm so sorry, Whitney. I was going to repeat the words anyway, so that's quite all right. So thanks for letting me know that. I appreciate it. So we will skip Whitney's intro. If you all can see the video, it was just the intro of the song. I believe children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. Show them all the beauty they possess inside. Give them a sense of pride to make it easier. Let the children laughter remind us how we used to be. Everybody's searching for a hero. People need someone to look up to. No one has ever said more valuable words than that about children. And those are the words that educators have to remember every single day that they are working on behalf of our students. So I just wanted to share that introduction. Again, my name is Dr. Rosenna Bakari. I am an empowerment expert. Oops, sorry. And my PhD is in educational psychology. However, today I practice more psychology than education. But my original research was on pre-service teachers' attitudes toward teaching African-American students. Over the last 20 years, I've taught pre-service teachers and counselors, as was emphasized in the introduction, and also the books and et cetera, et cetera. So I hope, in my first book, I actually wrote in 1996, titled Self-Love, Developing and Maintaining Self-Esteem for the Black Woman. And so these topics are not new to me. I am hoping and trust that those credentials will earn your attention for the next 75 minutes. If not, let me know, because I have some more. But I have a feeling that if I keep going, it's not going to impress you anymore. You're just going to figure out that I'm old. So let's get into it. Since many of you are educators and you are good at giving tests, it may be a while since you've had one. So the next slide I'm going to show is going to be your first of a couple of tests that you'll get throughout the day, because we want to make sure that you're on your toes. So I want you, when you see the next slide, I want you to put in the chat what you can identify from the next image. I'm only going to show it to you for a second or so. And so I want you to write in the chat, take a quick peek, then write in the chat what you see. Write it in the chat. And Megan, would you mind unmuting yourself and letting me know what kind of answers are coming in?
We've got biological systems theory, ecological systems theory, macro systems, microsystems, child at center, ecosystem, child surrounded by the stuff that they need, systems, child, kid at center, person and environment,
10 more seconds. Any others coming in?
systems that influence us on an individual level,
All right. So we're going to take a slight detour to talk about salience. And so the reason you only see a picture of you only get a couple of minutes is because what you see when we don't get time to explore determines the next behavior that we do. So if I give you time to look at this picture, then we can, oops, sorry. Let me tell you why this is going to happen several times, because I'm working with two screens and I keep getting my mouse on the wrong screen. So bear with me with that. I'll get it right before the presentation ends. So the child in this image is what psychologists will refer to as salient. Now, I'm happy to see that for many people, you already know that you've seen something else that captured your focus here, right? Maybe because this is familiar, maybe because your screen is positioned a certain way, but salient simply refers to what draws our attention, and what draws our attention is that which is most noticeable, right? Research on salience also tells us that what draws our attention is associated with outcomes. So I'd be curious to see or hear and talk, if I talk to those people who pointed out some of the systems that they saw, I'd be curious to pick their brains and see how much of those systems they see or account for some of the outcomes when we talk about education. So I'm glad to hear some of those responses. If we look at the detour in this picture, this just gives us one example of salience. Both of those inner circles look like different sizes. The one on with the smaller picture, the inner circle looks bigger than the bigger picture, but the inner circle is actually the same size, right? put a 1 in the chat if that makes sense to you. You can see that they're both the same size. It's difficult. They don't look the same size. The reason they don't look the same size is because of salience. And this is an important point to remember, especially for those of us who already get that, oh, there are influences on that happening, pressing on that child. Then we get more options about what becomes salient to us when we get to see the picture. But if we don't understand, then what is in that in the picture with the smaller picture, it looks like the child in this case would be bigger, right? When we look at problems, it looks like the child is the problem. If we have different types of training and understanding about systems, then when we look at problems in education, we are more likely to see what's happening on the big circle. We understand that there are forces pressing against that child. In this case, that's the same. So the size of the child doesn't change. How we develop systems around the child changes. So what becomes salient determines what our next step is. So we're going to keep that in mind as we move forward in this presentation. Okay. So in education, if we approach the problem of achievement, what has happened sometimes is that we focus on students. We continuously identify like what students do or do not do, what they have or they aren't having. When students are salient in the educational system, we look at the students. The bias is to blame students for their own outcomes, right? Students' family life, students' intelligence, students' goals are the problem, student financial resources are the problem. Today, what's salient? Today, COVID-19 is now a salient factor. And we've seen over the last several years or last couple of years, it gets blamed for all of the problems that have been in existence before 2020, not just in education, but everywhere. We're going to be blaming COVID for stuff 20 years from now, I'm sure. Well, that's because when COVID happened, right? But students, the reality is that students felt isolated before COVID. Students felt ignored before COVID, and students were often targeted before COVID, before the quarantines. Students lived under teachers' low expectations before COVID. So there are only a few new problems that were created by COVID. Most of the problems that we're trying to address now were problems that existed before COVID. COVID only brought to the forefront the problems that we have been ignoring or denying for the last 75 years in education, right? The time to build students' resilience was before the pandemic. Resilience is the ability to withstand difficult circumstances, but you have to develop resilience before the difficult circumstances arise. And so that's important for us to keep in mind here. Okay, let's see. The more favorable each of the systems are around that child, the more resilience a child has. And by favorable, I mean the system has to be geared toward the best interests of the child. Rules have to work in favor of the child. Errors are addressed in favor of the child, meaning that there are soft landings that allow children to course correct. People in the systems are rooting for and preparing for the child to win. Resilience is not built within the child. Resilience, this is important, is built within the systems. I have a feeling that the people who readily identify the systems as opposed to the child already know that, right? Children are motivated when they see themselves positively reflected within the system that surrounds them. Children work hard when they're embedded within systems that they want to be a part of. Okay. Education is a major system for children. Teachers, guidance counselors, principals, administrators are part of a system. How they respond to the system influences how they respond to students, and in turn, how students respond to them. Children's outcome is the bottom of the funnel. It's not the top of the funnel. The student outcome is our litmus test for how our systems are working. COVID-19 is the standardized test. And we see the outcome discrepancies that have always been there, not that were created by COVID-19. I understand now that when a teacher is trying to get a child's attention to take their seat or stop talking, the classroom environment is probably the only consideration. They're probably then, even those who understand the systems, they're probably not thinking about, oh, well, what happened is that the system imposed, but right, there's certainly time of action when you're just focused on how to get through that moment. When students accumulate more absences than attendance, the problem seems obvious, right? Maybe they don't care about education, but is that really true? Probably not. So as I emphasize with my clients, and the point that I'm really trying to make here today is that every behavior makes sense to the person doing the behavior, and rarely all the underlying motivations fully known. Sometimes what's pressing upon a person's behavior is an experience that happened decades ago. Sometimes it's an experience that happened centuries ago to their ancestors. Sometimes current systems are designed with such biases that produce what appears to be erratic behaviors in people. Looking at and judging just the behavior creates a lot of missed opportunity to course correct. So today, we're going to take some time. We're going to take advantage of this opportunity to course correct. There are no students here, no parents here, at least pressing upon what we're doing right now. There's no principal peeking through the classroom door. So today I really want us to take a broader look at student resilience. If we're going to address student resilience, then we have to first talk about what causes the need for such high resilience in children. Right? We're like, we have to give students resilience. Why do we have to keep giving students resilience, right? When we look at these statistics on teen suicide, obesity, increased diagnoses, violence among children, we see that there's a problem. But these sort of statistics do what? They make the child salient in the discussion. They make the child, they're telling us what's happening, what's coming out of the funnel. And it prevents us in some ways from really analyzing what's going into the funnel if we're only looking at what's coming out of the funnel. What will happen if we pinpoint the system instead of the child? What will happen if we started looking at the macro and the micro, right? And the ESO systems? Maybe the questions would be different then. Social media attributes to children feeling disconnected. Would that create a different research question? Would that make us speak differently about the ways that we're trying to build up students' resilience if we start with the system? Mental health system prefers drugs to stabilize children. What would happen if we started with that instead of what children, how many children have diagnoses, right? What would happen if we said families are too overwhelmed to nurture children? School policies create achievement gaps. What would happen if we flipped it and started constantly looking at what's going into the funnel, not what's coming out? What if these statements were our starting points for addressing child development issues instead of just academic achievement? What if instead of finding ways to help children become more resilient, we focused on making systems more robust for optimum human potential? That's the question. So historically, we've used the deficit model to explain why children of color fail in particular. Some of the models have been blatantly racist and others have been more subtle. Some educators ascribe to the bell curve ideology long before it was a book title. That ideology make assumptions about the salient differences in test scores between Black and white students. The difference represents intelligence according to the bell curve. The differences are natural, not just normal. The nature of the differences suggests that trying to change the differences is a waste of time and money. Although many teachers believe that they feel differently, they still teach in a way that suggests otherwise. Their efforts toward teaching children of color represent those assumptions, even when their stated ideology or conscious ideologies do not. So we have to address that as part of the system. Black boys, for example, we know are still punished more harshly for the same infractions. Black students are called on less frequently. Children are forced to speak English only as if mastery of the English language is the ultimate sign of intelligence, even though it disrupts the flow of generational knowledge. We have to know that it's not a good thing when a little girl can't speak to her grandmother who lives in the same house. Latino and Black children are underrepresented in the gifted and talented program by measures interestingly similar to their overrepresentation in special education. One has to wonder, is it possible that some of those that we have in special education should be in gifted education, especially since considering that behavioral issues or problems or evidence is very similar between people who have emotional challenges and people who are gifted. So they're not exclusive. It's the taking one mass murder to McDonald's on the way to the police station, but killing a man suspected of petty thief kind of ideology. Is that the mentality for education that hides beneath all this standardized test score emphasis? Is that what creates the need for such high levels of resilience? If so, it is resilience that we need to address? Maybe not. Again, we're talking about what's happening at the systemic level. So just take a minute, or a second, put a 5 in the chat if you're still with me, because we're gonna move on to look at what some of these deficit models are. So we got 5s coming in the chat, Megan. Are people still with me?
We do, several 5s.
Okay, all right, good. Thank you. So some of the deficit models come from a so-called good place. Some educators believe that children of color just need to be taught proper school culture. We went through this period in the early 2000s, late 90s, and many of us are still there. We want to instill into them the superior knowledge that they're lacking, and we believe that they will be fine. Now, here's the point to consider. A fish does not know what water is. Similarly, when white people insist that they are simply trying to acclimate children of color to the real world, they don't see the racism in it. Tiger Woods, for example, was not supposed to pump his fist with excitement when he won the Masters. Venus Williams was not supposed to wear her hair braided to a professional tournament. To this day, some school districts still consider natural African hair a distraction and forbidden. Every school policy and procedure benefits one group of people. When I taught my pre-service teachers and I made them grapple with ideas about school reform, they frequently came up with this idea that if everyone followed one standard, it would just make education so much better. And I would agree with them. I'd say, oh, why didn't I think of that? That sounds like a good idea. Let's try that. Here's how it works. I make all the rules. Now, interestingly, as soon as I say I get to make all the rules, suddenly people don't see that as so fair anymore. Suddenly they want to back off of that idea. It's like, oh, but no, the rules are already there. Oh, so it's not that you believe that we should all go by one standard. What you believe is that the standard that exists should be implemented to everyone. That's a difference in those statements, okay? So if we believe in one standard, the question is, who do you want to make the standard? Because that's what we're really grappling with. We're not grappling with whether or not this is right or that's right. What we're really grappling with is who's getting to make the rules, because we understand that who gets to make the rules is going to influence who benefit from all of these rules. So that's important to keep in mind. So when we started looking at education and trying to get children acclimated to school culture, as we called it, it didn't sound like such a good idea to students of color at all, right? This deficit model of helping students to acclimate to the standards feels terrible for people who have been systemically oppressed by the standards. On a regular basis, white people ask me, for example, how long it takes me to do my hair. Now, interestingly, no Black person has ever asked me that question because they know I don't do my hair, right? It's not a relevant question. They know the difference between locks and braids. So they may ask me, how long have I been growing my locks? Or who does my locks? But if I'm in charge of the standards and basic grooming is a necessity, I must deem the question, who does your hair, unintelligent. As it stands, there is no incentive at all, however, for white people to really understand who does my hair or understand Black hair care. There's no incentive for that, right? But if I deem that to be intelligent because I'm creating the rules, then that becomes problematic. Doesn't matter if you're talking about hair or how to identify 7 continents or what level of math is really important. We learn what's important to us. Vygotsky taught us that intelligence is based on cultural symbols. Trying to make up for children's deficits creates a disconnect between teachers and students. It's a statement that students are not acceptable, that something about them needs to be different, needs to be fixed. Now, I'm going to tell you something important, so listen carefully. I don't want you to miss this point. You can achieve the same goal with 2 different purposes. Your purpose matters, and your purpose cannot start from a deficit model when you're teaching children of color. So this is not about throwing out all the rules at all. This is about how it is that you come to understand the people that you are responsible for teaching. And if you understand them from a position of deficit, it's going to create a disconnect. So I want you all to take a minute to, and this time I am going to give you a whole minute. I want you to put in the chat a common classroom behavior that makes a classroom function. And Megan, you can just report those as they come in. A common classroom behavior that makes a classroom function.
Raquel said participation, respect, respecting the speaker, active listening, raising your hand, paying attention, quiet voices, showing effort, routines, student engagement.
Okay, thank you. So that's enough. So I don't think anyone, no matter what their pedagogy is, will argue about those student needs. So we're not saying, oh no, students should be able to run around or jump around, do whatever they want. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is when you attempt to get those behaviors from a deficit position, it feels different and the outcome is different. So let me give you an example. I think someone said talking one at a time or quiet room or something like that. One, what we want to do, first of all, is make a connection, not a command. So let's say you have a student who keeps interrupting and talks all the time, because that's how conversation happens, right? We want to make a connection, not a command. So instead of saying, look at the rule is, right? Because what happens when I tell people what the rule is? We'll get to that in a second. What if we said, wait, Jelani, so we can hear every word Jamaica says? You've made a connection between Jelani, Jamaica, and the teacher. Rules don't make connections. People make connections. So we have to learn how to make connections, not commands. There's a lot of commands happening in classrooms and too little connections happening in classrooms. So one, we can make a connection. Two, when we explain the function and not the rule, we make connections. So as opposed to that's the rule, because the rule means I have power to enact it. A rule sets people in their place. It tells you who's in charge and who does and who does not have the power. So every time you tell a kid what the rule is, you're letting them know who's in charge. But when you talk about what the function is, again, it's an opportunity to make a connection. When you speak one at a time, I can hear you better. That's explaining a function, not demanding a behavior. When you speak one at a time, when we speak one at a time, we can hear each other better, right? And the third thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we are empowering children, not oppressing children with these rules and commands and constantly putting children in their place, right? You can have so much more time to talk, Jelani, if you wait until Jamaica finishes. Now, I'm telling a student what their opportunities are, not what they can't do. I'm telling them what they can do. It matters. It matters. And the thing is that the more we connect to children on a heart level, these things, when you start practicing them, they may sound awkward or whatever. It's a practice. It's a practice for the language, because the language has to penetrate to the heart. The practice comes from the heart. We have to decide that we want to have connecting relationships with students, not hierarchical control issues with students. But when we keep talking about classroom behavior becomes salient, and we forget that the child is simply a wheel in the system, right? Behavior is the body is coming out of the funnel. What are we putting in? Okay. If you have the idea that children are uncultured because they're used to speaking up all at once, which I might add is a really great skill, you focus on teaching the correct rule and you miss the connection. And you never learn to be comfortable in a deliberate, lively discussion yourself. Kids can teach you something about how to play the dozens, first of all, right? But how to also engage. There's a reason that some children come to school having practiced that engagement a lot. And we don't want to disconnect them from that potential, right? We just want them to feel connected and engaged to what's happening in our space with them. Sometimes when we speak all at once, it's not to be heard, right? It's to be united. It's to be invested in arousal together. It's to be committed to the conversation. That too is a high level skill, right? So what are you seeing? Put a 3 in the chat if you think you can survive a 4-way conversation with nobody taking turns. If you understand what that's about, put a 4 in the chat.
Got a 3, got a 4.
3, I did say 3 the first time, then I said 4 when I changed. So yes, yes.
Both of those.
Yes, yes, we know the value of those. Okay. Other type of deficit model is that the belief that children are more important than the communities they come from. And this is a serious issue. I have seen this so many times. Systems that offer child programs that never include parents, isolating the children from the educational experience, from the education, isolating children in the educational experience, but by separating them from the family. And I have seen more programs fail because they don't make an effort to bring the family along, that it doesn't have to be that. We must bring families along. We cannot tell children, we cannot empower children while we disempower their communities. I say that we cannot empower children while we disempower the communities they come from. Okay, they will feel the deficit. It won't be a good outcome. When you don't value a culture or its people, then a community is often not considered. So we want to make sure that we are valuing all those in the system. In my introduction, I shared with you that I did research on pre-service teachers' attitudes toward teaching African-American children. I did that research in 1999. As I also mentioned in my introduction, I told you the longer I talk, the older I sound. Anyway, when I peek at what's going on in education today, I don't see a whole lot of evidence of change from when I did research decades ago. I surveyed 415 undergraduate students taking classes toward their teacher licensure. Participants came from 3 historically Black universities in New Orleans and a predominantly white university in Colorado. I asked questions related to how the pre-service teachers felt about teaching students in general. And then I repeated the same question, replacing the word student with African-American student. I wanted to see if pre-service teachers would show a significant bias against teaching African-American students. So a sample question would be like, I would stay after school to help a student. And then later ask, I would stay after school to help an African-American student. There were 3 critical findings in that research that were consistent with previous research, and presumably is still happening because I didn't come across any research stating otherwise in my preparation for today. The first finding was that pre-service teachers prefer to teach children of their same race. Doesn't matter if they're Black or white, people prefer to teach children of their same race. No surprises there at all. The problem is that the people who display the highest preference for teaching are the least, for teaching Black children, are the least available to teach Black children.
Dr.
So
Bakari.
Black students are taught consistently by people who do not prefer them. Let that sink in for a minute. Only white children are taught consistently in K-12 by people who prefer them. Only white children. Almost 80% of the K-12 public school teaching force is white. Black teachers make up 7%, Hispanic 9%, Asians 2%. And fewer than 2% of teachers are Native American or other. Only 47% of students are white. So that's disproportionate to the teachers. And they get selected by white teachers. Schools that have more than 90% white students have more than 97% white faculty. In schools that have at least 90% students of color, the shares of teachers of color are, the shares of teachers who were Hispanic was 28%, and 20% were Black and 5% were Asian. 43% are white. Okay, so in predominantly students, in schools that have 90% minorities, overwhelmingly still the majority of their teachers are white. So we have some disproportion. We're going to come back to that in a little bit. Another critical finding of my research was that white teachers with the most exposure, this was the most interesting finding. White teachers with the most exposure to Black students had the least favorable attitudes for teaching them. Now, I have to put this in context. I want you to understand. So in the late 90s, teacher education started to emphasize preparation for teaching in urban schools to address the Black teacher gap. So as we saw more fields opening to people of color, Black students, like others, started choosing more careers, whereas for a long time, because so many fields were closed to educated Black people went into education, not always by choice, but by opportunity, which is different for the majority of white people. They go there as an opportunity. Many Black people were stuck being teachers because that was a good paying job, while many other doors were closed to them. So as doors opened up, Black people started to make more choices. People of color started to make more choices about what they wanted to do. So that left a flight from education, and that left a shortage of Black teachers. And so having this understanding that white people being the majority of teachers for Black children, in fairness, education tried to address that issue. And their effort to do that was by making sure that all of the people in teacher education had urban experiences before they graduated with their teacher licenses. Complete failure. But it's what happens when you look at what's coming out of the funnel without considering what's going in the funnel, right? So it was and so this research was one of the pieces of research that verified not how much that idea was failing, okay? So what seemed to be happening is that there were a couple of problems, but one is that it was the blind leading the blind. And so what was difficult to address was that higher education, in other words, teacher education, was doing a worse job than K-12 teachers at diversity. So in higher education, less than 5% of faculty and instructors are people of color. And so you had white professors trying to monitor white teachers going into urban schools, and it was the blind leading the blind. So what happened is that many of the white pre-service teachers did their field work, because that's what they were doing. They were going in there doing field work. So many were required to do one semester in an urban school. First of all, for many of the students, it required them to travel a great distance. So that was problematic in and of itself. But then even when they were in these urban areas, they had no guidance as to what they should see and how they should interpret what they see and how to connect to the communities that they were going in, right? And so that was a huge problem. So pre-service teachers often confirmed their stereotypes about students of color because a fish does not know what water is. In other words, the pre-service teachers went into these urban environments without understanding how to connect with the community and the students. Their conclusion was that children of color needed school culture, not that pre-service teachers needed to understand diverse cultures and experiences. So occasionally, unsatisfied pre-service teachers will complain, for example, to me about talking too much about Black stuff. That was the evaluation. She talks too much about Black stuff. And it made me wonder how many of them ever put that on their white professors' evaluations. This professor of philosophy never mentions African in antiquity and the philosophies that they had. This psychology class never mentions Asa Hilliard or Kajan. I wonder how many of them ever put that, but a fish does not know that it's out of water, and a fish does not know what water is until it is out of the tank, and then it flops around looking for the ocean, right? So that was the second critical issue with the research. The third critical finding was also interesting, and that was that Black students, although they were more enthusiastic about teaching Black students, they had a high preference for teaching Black students over teaching students in general. So they were targeting Black students in the same way that white pre-service teachers were targeting white students. However, they also believed, Black pre-service teachers also believed in the assimilation model in education. They were adhering to the same educational training scripts as their white peers. They had never been invited to think or consider culture in education themselves, and so it was not their expectation that that is what was required. So here's what happened when we finally tried to stop blaming Black and Latino students for their own failure. We started blaming teachers. We started treating white teachers as if they were naturally inferior and acting like they did not belong in a classroom with students of color. I'm sure there's an article or two that actually says that, right? Children of color, what's the problem with that? We just talked about it. Children of color on average will have 5 teachers of color, if they're lucky, during their K-12 years. The remaining of their 35 teachers, because remember, in middle and high school, you're not with the same teacher all day long. So their remaining 35 teachers will be white. I'm gonna let that sink in for a second. And then we're going to consider this. We spent a good 50 years telling Black children they could not learn. We spent the next 20 years telling white teachers, the teachers who will teach them the most, that they can't teach. Now we have schools full of children who we don't expect to learn with teachers we don't believe can teach them. Does anybody see the problem? Put a 4 in the chat if you see the problem.
Lots of 4s.
Okay, thank you.
4.
So the word for expectation of positive outcome is called efficacy. Black children have lower efficacy for learning, and white teachers have lower efficacy for teaching Black children. When we're ready to explore all the systems that put that runaway train in motion, now we're ready to talk about resilience. COVID-19 quarantines exacerbated a bad situation. If your teacher is completely outside of the community and barely connected when in person, connecting to students online in a caring way is nearly impossible. The stakes are higher on both ends for teachers and students. Home situations were not designed for such prolonged close contact, nor for isolation that others experience. Before COVID, students slipped through the cracks in education. During COVID, students fell through the holes. How do we pull them out of the whole hole? Especially when educators, many of them, are also in the hole. All right, it's time for another test. Now that you understand salience and have knowledge of teachers' bias, let's take your next test. Like before, the image will only appear for a few seconds. Put in the chat the shapes you see. Megan, you want to offer us some responses?
Yeah, we've got triangle, circle, star, Pac-Man, triangles, stars, Pac-Man, circle, star, Pac-Man, circle, star, triangle.
So here's another one about biases. Our minds habitually connect to every experience and connect every experience we know to experiences before that moment. So this is why when we sent white teachers into urban areas, they saw triangles. We have the picture. They saw triangles. Some of you see triangles. Our mind is conditioned for us to see triangles. Now looking at the picture, tell me how many triangles you see. This is that SAT high stakes math question. How many triangles do you see?
So we've got 8, we've got 2, 8, 2, 5, 5, 0, 8, 11.
All right, can we shout out the name who said 0?
Yes.
Just the first name.
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth, thank you. Elizabeth, there are 0 triangles in this image. There are 0 triangles. So if you do not have the training, experience, expectations to describe or understand what is going on, you will use the experience that you have. And our experience tells us that these are indeed triangles. Research, however, has assured us that our brains are trainable, right? We call that plasticity. So we're going to try this again. The person who, Elizabeth, would you mind putting in the chat what this picture is? How would you describe this picture? What do you see here? This is for the bonus, Elizabeth.
Incomplete shapes, Elizabeth says.
Okay, incomplete shapes. All right, incomplete shapes. If I ask you to draw a picture of incomplete shapes, would you draw anything that looked like this? So if you were telling someone, and other people can write in too now, if you were telling someone to draw this picture, what would you tell them to draw?
Unity, layers of shapes, triangles and circles inside a square, positive and negative shapes that use implied line. That was Elizabeth again.
Okay.
Also, Dr. Bakari, we've got about 7 minutes until we move to the discussion portion.
Okay. Oh, wow. Oh, that went by quick. Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's move on quickly with that. So here's what happens. Like when you don't have language, you don't have experience. Now, I bet if we have a master's degree math person in here, they would give us something about this that we don't even understand. But if I ask you to draw me 3 45-degree angles, there are 3 angles in there. Actually, there's more if you count the Pac-Man. There are no triangles, there are angles. Draw me 3 45-degree angles that open toward each other. Then draw 3 Pac-Mans in the space between the angles, but not on the same line. You might be able to draw me something that looks like this. How many people agree with that? Put a 2 in the chat. Right. But as soon as I tell you to draw a triangle, I have misrepresented the image. This is the value and this is the importance of understanding the complexity of culture, community, and systems. If we only can talk about triangles and we view everything from the position of triangles because triangles are so familiar to us, we cannot speak or address the complexity of it. Okay. So let's take a deep breath here. I'm gonna flip through some of the other things that I think are most important. So right now, where are we? The ABCs of supporting students' resilience. 1, adjust your attitude, right? You must be willing to love diverse students, because all the children deserve your best, not your tolerance, your best. B, Ron Brenner systems approach addresses the whole child. We must have understandings that address the whole child. And 3, connection. When children connect, they learn. Okay. Critical theories use systems approach. These are a list of them. If you don't take a screenshot of this, if you do not know who all of these people or systems are, do your due diligence when you get that next break, investigate some of them, okay, or all of them. Bring the hidden to the forefront. Understand that teachers, and this is critical, teachers cross all of these systems. They're one of the few people who do. Doesn't matter. Professional athlete, you had a teacher that influenced you. Doctor, lawyer, baker, you've had a teacher that influenced you. In church, teachers influence you. Boardroom, teachers influence you. Teachers cross these systems. So of course they're critical.
Dr. Bakari, we have somebody asking you to go back to the slide with the names on it so they can capture it.
Yes, I will. Yeah, there we go. So teachers influence all of these systems. When teachers are willing to be a buffer to discrimination, when teachers are willing to be a buffer toward stereotypes and low expectations, then systems will not swallow them up. When teachers are willing to be consistent and unwavering in their support, students thrive. When teachers are willing to be non-judgmental, students thrive. When teachers empower students, they thrive. But if the only power that students ever see is used against them, the classroom will feel like an unsafe place and students will respond accordingly. Okay, so be the student, be the teacher that students want to learn from. All right, we're going to skip that because we are. So I want to share a little bit about my own story in education, and then we'll kind of fade out from there, because I want you to understand, and I want you to have some good examples of quality teaching, I think. So I have 2 examples. One, I sent my daughter to I homeschooled my children until they were in 8th grade. Till they were in 9th grade, sorry. I sent my daughter to a predominantly white high school after 8th grade because she wanted to be on a swim team, and we lived in Iowa. So I didn't have an option to send her anywhere else. She had been swimming for a long time, but since she swam for the YMCA, she wanted to have a more advanced career and swim for a high school team, so she did. The first week of school, my daughter came home crying every day. She felt isolated, uncared for, and even though her teammates went to the same school, she didn't get along with anyone. That made her feel connected. So the second week of school, I called the office and requested to meet with her teacher. They asked me which one. I said, all of them. Anybody who has anything to do with my child, I want them in the room. So they complied. I showed up before any of the other 7 people could get there because I didn't want to give them a chance to collaborate without me. And to make a long story short, I explained to them that my child was what every teacher keeps saying they want in a classroom, that makes for a good student. She came from a 2-parent family, both parents highly educated. She had all the technology. She had a strong academic background. I said, she has everything that teachers say that they want in a student. So why is she crying, isolated, and confused and don't want to come back here after literally 1 week of class? I said, something's wrong with your school. Something's not wrong with my child. Something's wrong with your school. And I challenge you to figure out what it is and fix it. Because if you cannot teach my daughter, you should close your doors. And that's what I said to them. And I challenged all of them. Now, nice into the story, we all came up with some, okay, we'll try this and we'll try that. And my daughter never liked that school, but they served her well. And I knew they had gotten it when one of her English teacher called me and said, I'm concerned your daughter got a C on a paper. I was like, yes, they got it. They understand. My daughter is not supposed to get a C on a paper. I don't want the phone call saying my daughter's failing your class. I want you to know that if she got a C on a paper, something is wrong, right? I had the math teacher, it took a little bit more to convince her that to give my daughter extra time on tests because she was coming out of a homeschool situation, never had a timed test. The math teacher gave her a month to catch up to get her test done on time. And I had to convince her to do that without getting an IEP. I said, no, she doesn't need an IEP. She just needs your compassion. That's what she needs, right? So long story short, I got everything that I needed to get for my daughter to have a quality education that year, right? Because it was one of those 8th grade schools. It was only ninth grade schools. So that was the only grade in the school. So, and then she went to high school. Now, of course, I know if some of you are thinking that's because you have a Ph.D. Right, that is the problem. That is the problem because there are other children who deserve similar consideration. It shouldn't take parents with PhDs to get their children's needs met. It should not be that way, right? Of course, parental involvement made a difference, but it wasn't just me. That's not the only story that I have. I can also tell you the story of my own high school experience. When I was in 9th grade, I had an algebra teacher, a white male, and I don't know if he didn't like teaching at an all-Black high school or he just had other things to do. I don't know. But my high school was 99.9% African-American, and we had some Latinos, but it was a Black urban school in Philadelphia. And so this math teacher, what he did care about was whether or not students got to class on time. And then he gave us ditto sheets. He gave us worksheets. I forgot, see, I'm showing my age again. They're called worksheets. Now, they used to be called ditto sheets. And so he gave us worksheets for the entire 45-minute period. And so I was late a lot. And so he threatened to fail me. Well, when he threatened to fail me, I stopped going to class. So I was like, okay, here's the thing. One thing that's important to understand about students, many students in general, and particularly about students of color. There's a rule. The rule is when students like you or love you, they will do anything for you. When students do not like you, they will do nothing for you. It's not necessarily logical. It's not academically sound. It's not good educational practice, but sometimes that's how it is for many students. When they feel disconnected, they completely disconnect, right? I completely disconnected. Let me just say in 9th grade, I was not a forward thinker, right? And so I disconnected, I stopped going, I just gave myself an extra lunch period, right? And so I fully braced myself for the first ever failing grade in my life. I was a decent student. I never had a failing grade before. I don't know what I was thinking. I just didn't go. This is how much I did not like this man, because he did not show any caring at all toward his students. So I stopped going. End of the school year, I braced myself. I opened that report card as I'm going over in my head the excuse I'm going to give my mother. I look at the report card. The man gave, I did not, keep in mind, I did not show up an entire fourth quarter. The man gave me a C-. I was infuriated because I was not a forward thinker at 14. I was infuriated. I'm like, how am I going to go into algebra 2, not knowing algebra 1? I knew that was going to be a problem. And so when I got to algebra 2, and the first thing I did was I told my teacher, she was a Black woman. I said, I don't know anything about algebra 1. And I explained the whole situation to her. And she was like, well, listen, we're not having any of that shenanigans. You're going to learn algebra 1. You got a month to learn algebra 1. And she meant that. She meant that. We were not the only one. I was not the only one. After school, before school, she made sure I learned algebra 1 while she was teaching algebra 2, because she insisted nobody was going to sit up in her classroom and fail anything. So it was a great experience. She course corrected me, sent me to Mr. Metzger for geometry. In geometry, Metzger, I never knew I liked math until I sat in Mr. Metzger's room. Who knew? I didn't know. I didn't know I liked math. I didn't know I was good at math. I didn't know, because I mean, with my 10th grade teacher, I mean, it was just all about getting caught up. Mr. Metzger made me love geometry so much that I took him the next year too. So I had him for 2 years. He also coached basketball. We became such good friends that we remained good friends well into my 20s, right? And he became my mentor. He became my friend, and he taught me math to this day. That's one of my favorite subjects. There's one thing he could not do. He could not convince me to choose Penn State. He could not get me to choose Cornell University over Penn State, because now I'm 17, still I'm not a forward thinker. I'm going to Penn State. Why? Because that's where my best friend has been accepted, and we're going to go through college together. Nothing no one said could convince me that life should be otherwise, until another white counselor called me in the office. She wasn't my counselor. I'd never met the lady before. Next thing I know, this person is calling me to the office. Like, it was like buzzing around the school. The student got accepted to Cornell University. She's not going. What do you mean she's not going? Like, I had no idea literally what was going on. And so she sat me down as gently as she could and had the race talk with me. She's like, this is an opportunity. She explained the difference between college levels and Penn State and Cornell, how my life would be different, blah, blah, blah. And so I said, and besides, I don't have any money. I don't even know how I'm going to do that. And so she's like, got money for Penn State? I'm like, no, I don't have money for Penn State either, right? So she literally got on the phone. She made a 10-minute phone call to Cornell University. I didn't realize she was the alma mater. I don't even know if I knew what an alma mater was. I'm I'm the youngest of 7 children. None of my siblings have ever gone to college, never applied to college. We don't know anything about how this system works. She gets on the phone, she gets off the phone 10 minutes later. She says, what's your phone number? We didn't have cell phones back then because I'm old. And she calls my mom and she says, Ms. Jackson, your daughter's going to Cornell University. I look in the mail, she's going to have a 4-year scholarship. You make sure she goes. That is how I stand here before you today, because people understood systems and they understood where I fit in that system and what they needed to do to be the buffer between me and those systems. That's what every child deserves. That's what every child needs. And teachers can be that for many, many students. I'm only their teacher is the most understated statement of a lifetime. Teachers are the most powerful people on the planet. They are the ones that keep things in motion. If we understand this collectively and pull our forces together, we can continue to make these kind of differences. So thank you. I'm going to end there and let some questions take place.
Dr. Bakari, we have a question in chat. It's from Candace. It says, I send both glows and grows to my students and parents, even though I let them know specifics about the grows, review and retake the L12 math quiz, I get pushback from parents. The students will do it if they know, but they don't always know when I D-O-J-O, I don't know the dojo, the parent. So I help them and have them redo the work in class. How do I get the parent support? And this person teaches in 5th grade.
Read the first part about what they're doing different. Just the first part. I don't know if I caught all of it.
I send both glows and grows to my students and parents, even though I let them know specifics about the grows, review and retake the L12 math quiz. I get pushback from parents.
For retaking the quizzes.
I believe so.
Okay. Yeah. There are some challenges, right? One is that people keep looking for triangles, right? As long as people are looking for triangles and judging everything from triangles, when you have the ability to see the complexity, you're obligated to do that. What's important is that what's most helpful for students is not what's most popular. So being a trailblazer has to be on your bucket list, because it's true, you will get pushback. Oftentimes when you do things differently, when you work on behalf of students, the question is it working? Sometimes you have to show people that it's working before you can get support for it, because we've always done it this way is a very common answer. And so if you can get someone to help you explain it, because sometimes we do things, but we can't explain why we do them or what the outcome is. So if you can help process, talk with your closest ally and say, how do I help formulate language where I can explain this and it makes sense to people? That's important. Sometimes it's just a language. Sometimes you need to actually look up research that supports this and say, this is why I want to do it this way. And that's real important. So I hope that helps. But if it's working, hold on to it. Hold on to it. Yeah. One of the difference between great students, between great people and good people, whether it's great teachers and good teachers, great lawyers and good lawyers, is that great people, great lawyers, great doctors, great teachers win the unwinnable. Like we set ourselves up and we commit to winning the unwinnable, right? And so if you want to only take on the cases that everybody knows you're gonna win because you should win them, you can be a good teacher, but you won't ever be a great teacher, right? The challenge is that if you want to be a great teacher, you have to first be where the unwinnable students are, right? You can be a good teacher in those schools that have those great SAT scores. There are good teachers there. I'm going to be hard pressed for you to tell me there are great teachers there. They haven't stood the test of time, right? So I say keep pushing so you can be a great teacher. Other questions in the chat?
There aren't currently. We have about 2 more minutes. So if you have a question, please feel free to put it in chat and we will get it to Dr. Bakari.
This time flew by. I can't believe it.
I guess you answered everyone's questions because nobody's putting anything in chat.
It's probably been a long day already. Yeah, thank you. It's been my pleasure to be here and present. I wish everyone well. Yeah, love your children, love yourselves. We all get to be connected and come out of the funnel fully whole. So thank you.
We do have one last question, 1 minute.
Yes.
Last question. If the system is inherently a triangle, state testing as a measure, of a teacher-student school effectiveness? How do we combat that as a teacher at the teacher level?
In your classroom, I will tell you that trailblazers is the nice word for rule breakers. And my mother taught me a long time ago that it's okay to break the rules if you first clearly understand the rules. But if you're just a rebel and just don't follow rules for the sake of not following them, you won't get very far. But if you can study and understand the rules and then know why you're breaking them and be prepared for the consequences of breaking them, you'll get a lot further in life because you know what you're doing. But trailblazer is another word for rule breaker. And so figure out what the rules are and who they benefit and how long they've been benefiting. And then you can understand, what do I need to do or reach out differently? When I was at the peak of my education research stuff, there were 8 schools across the country. I don't even know if they still exist because it was almost 2 decades ago. There were 8 schools across the country identified as super schools. They were school districts that had predominantly Black and Latino children and were consistently in the 85th percentile on standardized test scores. So they called them super schools. And so people wanted to research them. They were really difficult to research because they would not let researchers in because they were breaking too many rules. They were breaking rules like, yes, like you're saying, yes, we re-give tests. Yes, we actually touch and hug our children. Yes, we make home visits. That was when you couldn't make home visits. We actually go to our children's homes. Yes, we actually feed, like all these rules that disconnect us from the people that we're trying to serve. They were breaking so many rules to connect with people. Yes, we use Ebonics in the classroom, that they would not let people come in and research them because they didn't want triangle focused people coming in who could not understand the complexity of their system. So it's a challenge. It is a challenge, but find allies, because there are a lot of people who feel the way that you do, but they may not be in your school. They may not be in a classroom next to you, but we're out here. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bakari. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to learn from you. We are out of time. The evaluation is in chat, so please fill that out. It's very valuable to us to know how these are received. And you are free to go to lunch. Thank you so much, Dr. Bakari.
Thank you. Appreciate it.